In this video, I'm going to show you the exact process I take to do multi-threading in U-Bot Studio. I've used this technique in hundreds of bots, including the account creator we're going to make today. I see people asking on U-Bot forums all the time about multi-threading and using thread spawn. And so I wanted to make a video showing you the right way to do multi-threading in U-Bot Studio. The truth is that you don't need thread spawn in order to do multi-threading, and doing it the right way gives you more control over the process. More control is better because it can lead to less errors and headaches later on. I know multi-threading can be scary to some, but I will break it down and show you that it's pretty straightforward and easy to do. So let's jump in and learn the exact process I use. So today we'll be making an account creator for a forum on the U-Bot Playground. First of all, I'm going to get rid of all this code so that we can make this together step by step. So this is what we're going to be creating today, but I'm going to get rid of it so that we can actually make it together. Before we begin, we need to list our requirements for this project. The first requirement is we need to make an account creator for the simple form on U-Bot Playground. So I'm talking about the form here. When you go to the U-Bot Playground and you click on simple form. So this is the page we will be making an account creator for. And for now, if you get this pop-up, I'm just going to click this. You can get that, make that go away automatically in U-Bot. Just do an if exists and look for that element and then click on it. But we're not going to add that in for this project. The second requirement is this account creator should be able to be ran multi-threaded. The third requirement is we should be able to control the thread count. It should not be fixed. So we're not going to have a static thread count of say 5 threads. The user should be able to say how many threads they want to use. So our fourth requirement is accept a number of accounts to create. Number 5, use random account information for the username and password fields. Number 6, first name, last name, and about me fields are spun text. In this case, we're just going to use spun text because it's different than, say, using random account information. I just want to show you 2 different ways, but typically you would also use random account information. But in this project, we're using spun text. And number 7, save the username and password to a list. So as you can see, we have a number of specific requirements that should be met for this project. So let's get started. The first thing I always want to do when creating a multi-threaded program is to make the core part of the program and test that to ensure that it works before adding any multi-threaded logic. Once the program is multi-threaded, you don't want to do any major debugging. In fact, the only debugging you should be doing at that point should be related to the multi-threaded logic itself, and not the core of your program. If you find any problems with the core of your script, then copy it out from the multi-threaded environment so that you can properly debug it on its own. With that in mind, let's make the core part of the program. And in this case, it's pretty simple. We need to go to a web page and fill in a form. So we're already on the simple form for the U-Bot Playground. And part of our program is the core of our program is going to be navigating. So we just simply need to drag in a navigate command, and it's already going to be populated with the current browser URL. So we can just hit OK. Now what we need to do is fill in this form. And we do have requirements about how to fill in this form, but for now, I'm just going to fill it in with dummy text. So we're going to do a type text for the username. We can just click on this element selector, simply click on the text box, and I'm just going to type username. And then I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to do the same for password, first name, last name, and about me. So I'm just going to right click, edit the type text, use the element selector to click password, and we're just going to type password. And do the same for the rest. And finally, we can click on the submit button. I don't believe the submit button works on this, but we can add that anyways. And generally you would want to wait for the page to load and, check for other things like that. But in this case, I'm clicking on the submit button. We can see that nothing's happening. And so we're not going to worry about what happens after this. That's not really the point of this tutorial. The point, of course, is to demonstrate the multi-threading part. So recall that requirements 5 and 6 have to do with the information to be filled in. Requirement 5 states that we should use random account information for the username and password fields. And number 6 says first name, last name, and about me fields are spun text. So we can take care of that part now, and then later we can modify it for multi-threading. So requirement 5 says that our username and password should be random account information. So let's go ahead and set that up first. In order to get random account information, we can call reset account. We don't care about the gender in this case. We can come into this type text and we can use the account data function to choose a random username for us. And then we can do the same for the password. So now that the username and password have random account information, our next requirement says that the first name, last name, and about me fields are spun text. Now, once again, you would probably use this account data function. However, I just wanted to show an example of using something else. So in this particular case, we're just going to do it this way. So we can use the spin function and we can come up with a couple of first names to use. And this is standard spin text format. You use the pipe key, which is just the straight up and down line, to separate each name. And that's fine for now. Again, I'm just demonstrating an example here. It doesn't need to be, we don't need any more than that. So we're going to use the spin function again. And again, let's come up with some last names. And that's fine for now. And for the about me, once again, can use the spin text. Okay. So we can click run and make sure that our information is being filled in the way we want it to. And everything looks good right now. So our last requirement stated that we need to save the username and password combination to a list. So we can also do that now. In order to do that, I'm going to take this account data and I'm going to put it into a variable. So it's a set command. And I'm just going to call this username for now and use another one for password. And then for now, we can also change these type texts like so. Now that we have our username and password in variables, we can do an add item to list command in order to add them to a list. And we'll call this list accounts. And because we created a list, I'm just going to clear the list at the very top of the program so we don't forget. Now that we have the core of the application, the part that is doing the actual work, we can now run this a few times to be sure we get the expected results. So I'll just press run. everything looks to be filled in. I'll look in the debugger to check the username and password. They look the same. The username looks the same. So let's just run this again. Make sure we don't get any errors. Okay, we have now a new username and password combination. Everything looks like it's matching up. In the real world, your application would be much more complex than this. You would want to have built-in logic to solve problems such as info already taken, such as username or email, invalid password, failed CAPTCHAs, and more. For now, we want to keep it as simple as possible, just to demonstrate how multi-threading works. So with that in mind, we won't be doing any more than this. Now that we know that everything is working as expected, we can now fulfill requirement number 4, which was to accept the number of accounts to create. And this is simply just going to be the number of times that we're going to loop for. So in order to accept this input, I'm going to use a UI text box. And in this case, I'm just going to say number of accounts. But I'm going to name the variable loops. And you can see I've got something there from the previous code. And in this case, I'm using a UI text box because we want to accept a number. This is maybe not the best way, but it's going to be the quickest way to accept any number in this case. So now because I know that we're going to multi-thread this, I'm going to save some time and put the main process in its own custom command. For more complex programs, you may already have done this, and you should be doing this if you're not yet. So let's create a new custom command using the define command. I'm going to call this create account. And just drag everything in there. Now that we have a custom command, we can just simply drop this into a loop. And we're just going to loop for the number of accounts to create. So let's go ahead and create our loop. And we'll loop for the loops variable, which is the number of accounts input. And now all we have to do is call our custom command within the loop. And we can go ahead and now test this. I'm just going to put 2 and press run, and we'll make sure that it creates 2 accounts. So everything appears to be working correctly. Now, before we go on to the multi-threaded part, I do want to do one thing. I want to pull this username and password out of here because I don't want to be resetting the accounts inside of the threads themselves. I feel like that could cause some errors. So what we're going to do is we're going to generate the account information before, and then we're going to send it down via a parameter. So for now, what I'm going to do is just pull this up here. I'm going to pull the password up here, and we're going to pull the reset account up here as well so that they're up above our main loop. I'm then going to create another loop before our main loop. And this is also going to loop for the number of accounts that they want to make. And I can just simply put these in here. And now what I can do is I can create a new list and I can add these to a list. So let's just clear our new list first, and we'll name this account information. And then on each iteration of this loop, we will add our username and password to this account information list. So we'll use an add item to list. We'll add the username, the colon, and then password. So now that we've done that, we need a way to pass down our new username and password on each iteration of the loop. So we can come down to this create account and we can add 2 parameters. And they're going to be username and password, but I'm going to preface each of them with an underscore, like so. Now the reason that I'm doing this is because these are essentially local variables. Because they're parameters in this particular custom command, only this custom command is going to be able to see them. And in fact, if we pass them down and we were looking in the debugger at the same time, we would never see the values of these parameters or variables essentially within the debugger. So for this reason, I'm prefacing them with an underscore, because that way I know when I'm looking in the debugger that anything with an underscore, I'm not expecting to be able to see the value of that. So it's just a quick way for me to know that for these particular variables, I won't be seeing the value. And it's also good because if I decide at some point I want to set it to be something else, I know that if it has an underscore that I need to come down to the advanced and select local. So there's several reasons why you would want to do this, but whenever I use local variables like this or lists, I always preface them with an underscore. So now that I've done that, we need to use these in the type text commands and when we're adding our new account to the list. So let's go ahead and change them here, as well as here. So now that we're passing these parameters down, we actually need to get rid of this because this does not contain the parameters because we had dragged it out before creating them. So let's delete that and let's drag it back in. And now we have the parameters, but we need to fill them in with the right account information. And so in order to do that, we can use another list to split these up. So let's go ahead and create a new list. And this time we want to be clearing this list on each iteration of the loop. And I'm just going to name this account. And we'll use an add list to list command. Copy that there. And we'll do a list from text. And the text is going to be the next list item of our account information list. And the delimiter is going to be a colon or whatever you used. And now that we've done that, on each iteration, we're going to be getting the username as our first list item in the account list and our password in the second list item in the account list. And so we can just simply add them here using the list item function. And I'm just going to copy this down here and just manually edit that to be a 1 and hit OK. And everything looks good, but of course we made a lot of changes, so we're going to have to test this, and we already have 2 accounts, so let's just press run and make sure we don't get any errors. Let's also take note of the name Various Tutor 29 and Jaded Shuttle 80, and let's make sure that those are the names that are showing up in our accounts, and they are, so that's a good sign. Now that we have the core of our program, we can now work on the multi-threading part. Multi-threading scares a lot of people because they think that it's complicated, but I don't want you to think about it that way. Remember that at this point we already have made the core of the program and we know that it works. Now all that is left is creating a little bit of code to manage how many threads can run at once. To accomplish this, we only need a few simple things. 1. We need to know how many threads can run at once. 2. We need to limit the application so that it does not exceed that number. And 3. We need to know when a thread starts and ends. And that's really all there is to it. When you break down multi-threading, it's not really all that complicated. Our job is to make sure that no more than a certain number of threads are running at the same time. And to do that, we only need to use a little bit of code. Now the first thing we need to do is make sure that we know how many threads the user wants, and to accomplish this task, we can use a dropdown. We can use a dropdown here because that way we control the input. Not only are we limiting the input only to numbers, but we can also specify a minimum and maximum thread count. So I'm going to go back up to the top and I'm going to create a new UI dropdown. And we can call this threads. And the variable is going to be thread count. And here's the nice part, we can control what the user inputs. So we don't want the user to input like 1,000 threads, obviously. We also don't want them to input 0 threads, or we don't want them to input a letter, things like that. And that's why we don't use a UI text box in this case. So we can say we only want to allow the user to create up to 5 threads. And we can do that by just doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Of course, values are separated by commas like it says here. And you can set however many you want, of course, but by doing this, we're only allowing the user to select between 1 and 5 threads. So now that we know the thread count, our job is to simply ensure that the number of open threads does not exceed that number. So let's first ensure that the part we want to be multi-threaded is in a thread. So let's come down to our custom command here, and we can use the thread command to simply just drag everything in it. We need to keep track of the open threads so that we don't exceed the max thread count. To do this, we can simply use a variable. So I'm going to come up above our main loop, somewhere near the top here, and I'm going to set a new variable. I'm going to name it used threads. And I'm going to set it to 0. That way, whenever we run our application, we're starting at 0 threads, which makes sense. There's no open threads when we press run. That's what this variable represents. Now all we need to do is say when the thread opens and when it closes. And we can do that simply by incrementing and decrementing this number. So I'm going to minimize this loop so it's out of the way here. And we're going to look at our main loop here, which has the actual create account, the meat of the program, the core of the program. Now before we create our account, we want to increment use threads because we want to say, hey, we're opening a new thread right now. Let's go ahead and put an increment there. Very important to put it before we hit the actual thread here. Now, what's also important is at the very end of the thread. However, inside the thread though, if I minimize all this, I want you to see this. We want to make sure that this is the last thing within the thread command. We then want to decrement this number. And this means that we're closing the thread now. This is the last thing that's happening, and this thread has completed. So it's very important that the decrement goes inside of the thread and that it is the last thing in the thread. That's really all there is to it in terms of keeping track of when a thread opens and closes. So far we already know how many threads to run, and we already know when a thread begins and ends. Believe it or not, we're already almost done. Now all we really need to do is limit how many threads are open at once, and we can do that by using a loop while command. So you're going to want to put this above the increment. You're going to want to make sure that this goes before you're opening a new thread and before you're even incrementing used threads. And in this particular case, I'm also going to put it above this other stuff with the account information. So we just call loop while. And what we want to do here is we want to make sure that our number of used threads, which is the number of threads which are currently running, or open if you will, does not exceed the thread count that the user specified. So we can use a comparison here. And we can say we don't want used threads. I'm just going to copy this. If it's greater than or equal to thread count, While this is happening, while our number of threads is either at the maximum or exceeded the maximum, which should never really happen, then we want to wait. So we're essentially putting the program on pause. If the user selects 3 threads and our program has 3 open threads, the program is essentially just waiting until a thread opens up. Once one of the threads reaches the end, it decrements the number of used threads. Our used threads would then essentially drop to 2, which is less than the thread count. It then allows the program to continue on and open up a new thread, where it will then go back and wait again until a new thread opens up. So this loop while is the heart of the multi-threaded code. It controls how many threads are open at one time. Now this is basically it. However, there's a few extra bits we need to add to really make this work well in all situations. The first is really important. We need to put a small wait after we create a new thread. This is going to make sure everything runs smoothly, and it will essentially eliminate any errors that you would normally see while multi-threading. So at the end of our loop here, of our main loop, or at the very least, after the thread has been opened up, not just after we increment, but after we call create account, because if you're not aware of how threads work, once create account is called, essentially it will open a new thread here to do its thing, but then the program will basically jump here, which will jump here, which will immediately go up here. So we want to slow that down just by a hair. So we're going to put a small wait here. And this is just to ensure, and I always use 0.1 seconds by the way, which is fine. This is just going to ensure that we don't get any errors, that UBot doesn't go too fast and step over its own toes. Without this, you may see some errors. So I highly recommend putting this, and make sure it's after the thread part, okay? And finally, once our main loop is finished, we will likely still have open threads. So typically, you will want to wait until all threads are finished before letting your program continue. To do this, we simply put a loop while after the loop, which contains your multi-threaded logic. So this is our main loop, and it contains all of our multi-threaded logic, except for the actual thread itself, of course. So after this loop is finished, we may still have threads running. If the user chose 3 threads, when we get here for the last time and it exits this loop, we may still have 3 threads running. And so let's just say that after that, we wanted to alert saying that the program was over, or we alerted finished. Well, technically the program would not be over yet because we would have open threads. So what we want to do is we actually want to wait until we know all of the threads are finished. And for most programs, you're going to want to add this little extra bit in. So we're just going to once again use the loop while command and a comparison. And we simply just want to say while our used threads are greater than 0, you can put that, or you can click on here and choose greater than. Make sure it's greater than and not greater than or equal to. Greater than 0, we're just going to wait. So now once our main loop finishes, if we had 3 open threads, the program will essentially pause here until our thread count drops to 0. And once there are no more open threads, it will then continue. In this case, all it's doing is alerting finished. However, generally you're going to have other things. You may want to say save the account list or do other things here. And that's all there is to it. Now our application will allow the user to specify the number of threads, and the program will not exceed that number. When the main loop is finished, the program will wait for all threads to finish as well before continuing. And now that our program is multi-threaded, we can give it a shot. So I'm going to up the number of accounts to create, let's say 5, and I'm going to set the number of threads to be 2. And I'm just going to press run, and we should see 2. You know what? We did forget one thing, so let's go ahead and stop this. I'm going to come down to our create account. One last thing is we need to make sure these are all happening in new browsers, or we're going to have some problems. So let's use an in new browser command. put it at the top of our thread here. And now all of our browser commands can go in here. And we can leave the decrement out of there. So if I collapse this in new browser command, you can see that decrement is still the very last thing in our thread. So now finally, let's press the run button. And as you can see, now we see the new browsers opening up on the right here. And they're going to be doing their thing. And there's no waits or anything, so this is going to go pretty quickly here. But I'm hoping that we can catch the loop while it's on. As you can see, we don't have any more than 2 opening. And that's because we have 2 threads. If I change this right now to be a different number, then we would likely see that number. Okay, here we go. You can see that the loop while has been hit. Until these close, we will basically be pausing the program. And there we go. So now that the threads have closed, we can see that it now says finished. So while the program is running, I'm going to change this real quick to show you an example. We can manipulate the thread count. It says 2 right now. What's happening is this is waiting until one of these closes. So I'm going to up this to 4. And we can see that now there's 4 open. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back to 2. And so what should happen now is once those close, we only see 2 opening up. So you can see that we can actually manipulate the thread count live like that. And you get the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And it looks like everything's working correctly. So at this point, we have fulfilled our 7 requirements. We made an account creator and then multi-threaded it. The program accepts the number of accounts to create as well as the thread count. We are using random account information and save off the username and password to a list. The multi-threaded part was achieved simply by accepting a maximum thread count and then managing it with a loop while. We kept track of when threads open and close simply by incrementing and decrementing a variable. And when our main loop was finished, we waited for all threads to finish before allowing our script to continue. I hope you can see that multi-threading is fairly straightforward and easy to implement. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out elitebotters.com as well. That's going to do it for me on this one. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below, and I'll see you in the next video.